Okay, we're going to end this afternoon with a discussion on the lessons learned from the Great Lakes Yin program. And for this, we have two presenters. We have Dennis Pennington. He's no stranger to PEI, and we welcome him back to PEI into our conference. Hi, Dennis. Dennis is from Michigan State University, Wheat Extension Specialist, has been employed with MSU Extension for 26 years, and Dennis received both his Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in Crop and Soil Science Department from Michigan State University. Have you left Michigan ever? Lived somewhere else?
But no, I've lived there forever.
You've been there forever.
Yep.
His current research program includes wheat state variety performance trials, precision planting, high yield management project, and Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. Dennis is committed to excellence and strives to fulfill MSU's Extension's mission by bringing science-based information and knowledge to critical needs and issues. Our second speaker is Joanne Follings, and Joanne is the cereal specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, where she works closely with farmers, industry partners, and researchers to advance best practices for wheat, barley, oats, and other cereal crops. Her role includes delivering technical resources, conducting applied research, and supporting sustainable production systems that enhance profitability and resilience for Ontario growers. She is part of the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network leadership team that is helping local farmers better understand their winter wheat yield potential and what is contributing to that yield. Great, thank you.
All right. Is this on? All right, great. Well, can I tell my story about my granddaughter?
You can hear me too.
So I'm a proud grandfather now. We have two granddaughters, my wife and I do. They're 4 and 3. I love them to death. And they like to spend the night at our house, so we have what they call a sleepover. Well, I've taught the 4-year-old how to help me make coffee, because I drink a lot of coffee. So she's been helping make coffee, so she knows right where everything's at in the cupboard and whatnot. All I have to do is get the stool thing set up there, and she climbs up on it, and she makes coffee. Or she's been helping me make coffee. Well, the other morning, we were at home, and or she had spent the night on a Friday night, and so Saturday morning, she's like, "Papa, I'll make coffee, okay? You go sit down. I'll make coffee, and I'll bring you a cup." I'm like, "All right, fair enough." So I went down, went and sat in the living room, turned on the TV, started watching the news, and I could smell the coffee brewing, and then pretty soon she brought me a cup. So I get this cup of coffee, and I start drinking, and it is the strongest coffee I think I've ever had. There's coffee grounds in it, but by golly, she made this coffee, so I'm going to drink it. So I'm drinking along and whatnot, and I get down toward the bottom, I notice there's something in the cup. So I reach down in there, and I pull out a little green army figurine. And I go, "Alyssa, what is this for?" He said, "Well, Poppy, it's just like on TV. The best part of waking up is soldiers in your cup." So, no, I love our two granddaughters, and my wife and I are very blessed. But so
Dennis is a very, very proud grandfather.
Yep. So I love to tell that story. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about.
So we're here to talk about the yen, and Steve did a great job of setting the stage for us. And we wanted to highlight the lessons that we've learned from our yen in the Great Lakes. Unlike Steve and Aaron, we haven't had the courage to dive into other crops yet, but we've been really fortunate to have really, really good uptake with our winter wheat yen, and are really excited to share what we've learned today. So we won't talk about this too much. Steve already did touch on this, but essentially what the yen is, or the Yield Enhancement Network, is that it's an opportunity to help farmers understand where their yield is coming from and how their management decisions on farm impact that yield. And one way of doing that is taking all of these data, doing a number of data collection or sample collection throughout the season, and collecting all their other agronomic information, and then benchmarking them against other producers or their peers in the program. And so this is just a quick snapshot of how we started and where we've come. So our first year, Dennis and I saw Roger Sylvester Bradley speak at our Ag Conference in Ontario in 2020, and in 2021, we both went out. We got 43 farms from Michigan and Ontario, and we're really proud that we've grown up to 176 farms last year, And for 2026, we have 180 farms registered. And these numbers are actually the number of farms that completed. And we typically have about like a 90% completion rate. So this is, out of all the projects that we've ever done, this is by far the highest completion rate of anything we've ever done with producers. And I should also mention on here, we also actually have some growers from Washington, which isn't on the map. And Dennis and I actually had a call this morning. This year, we're going to have a grower from Romania join our yen this year, and we also have some producers from Quebec this year as well.
So we collect a bunch of information. I think this is similar to what you collect here in PEI, but we collect soil samples, tissue samples at 2 growth stages, the grab sample, a grain sample, and we collect all the agronomic data as well. We use a program called Crop Track. I think you rely on Steve to get data into the system for you. But we actually have our users actually log into a system, and then they fill out, they say what variety they planted, what seeding depth, seeding rate, and then all other information in there. So it's very data collection intensive. We collect a lot of information. Go ahead.
We didn't really plan this. So in terms of, so we collect all of that data. So we collect about 90 data points from each farm. So everything from your seeding rates, the variety you're growing, to the crop protection products and rates of those, the herbicides, the fungicides, your fertility program, growth stages, all sorts of things. And we take all of that data along with the sample data that we collect, and we generate a final report. So this is a way for growers to take information and make decisions that is data-driven rather than, I think that had a response, I think that did something. So it's, real information from their farm. They're actually measuring something and seeing if they're actually accomplishing something and moving forward.
Yeah, and so we still use these box plots, and I understand maybe you're moving away from the box plots a little bit, but it shows the range and the values so people can see where their numbers are in relation to other growers in the program. And then we also put, so their number is highlighted in the yellow, and then the green line would be the top 10%. So everybody wants to know, okay, well, on my yield components, what are my yield components look like compared to those guys that are getting that really high yield? Where might I be lacking compared to what they're doing? So on these box plots, they can look at that green line and say, this is where the high yield guys are. Maybe this is an area I need to think about or look at. So the report is full of these box plots for everything from the, crop nutrition to yield components, the amount of fertilizer applied, seeding rates, and so on. So it's a great resource for making decisions, and you got to have data if you're going to make management decisions going forward. And this is just an example, and I put just phosphorus box plots up here. As you look at the plots up in the top left, we start with a soil sample. We say, okay, what does your soil have in it? And then based on that, you would say, okay, at 28, you're kind of in that maintenance range. So we got to make sure we're applying phosphorus on this field. We want to make sure we apply enough. And then we have the 2 tissue samples at growth stage 31, which is 1 node, and then flag leaf just below it there at 39. We also test what's in the grain and the straw. So we get kind of at the end of the season, what happened, like a complete evaluation throughout the growing season. And then, we'd look at up here, the total amount of P2O applied was 71 pounds to the acre. With a soil test level of 28 ppm, you would think that you wouldn't have any kind of deficiency. But when we look at our grain phosphorus, where's his number at?
Oh, I can't get this to work.
It's all the way on the far left there at 0.3. That's this number, yeah, right up there. So a lot of times this data helps people have kind of these aha moments of like, oh, I didn't realize I might have had a deficiency. I thought with a soil test level of that and the amount that I'm applying, I'm in good shape. I didn't realize that I could possibly have a deficiency.
So yeah, again, just to highlight that with the report, it's a way for growers, how many projects are we involved with? We help researchers, and we actually never see a report or the end result of that project. And so the yen is a way for growers to actually see results on the farm and make decisions. The other part of the program, so we have the report, they are making data-driven decision-making, but the other part of the program that I think is an important part is the peer-to-peer learning aspect and what we can actually do collectively with all of that data. And so we host, similar to what your group does, we host a wrap-up meeting in different parts of our region. This year we just had it actually last week for Michigan and Ontario. And what we do is we go through all of the data and we highlight, here's what you guys are doing and gals are doing on your farm. Here's what things look like. So for example, just like Steve highlighted, these are the varieties. This is just Ontario varieties because the US has a lot different varieties than what we grow here in Canada. So we can show, this is what growers are growing. I think R64 was actually your most popular one this year too. That's a newer variety. It's been out a couple years now from Pioneer. And then Blaze and R40, which will never die for whatever reason. And then we've got R65 and Constellation. So we've got quite the range. And we actually only had one person that didn't know what variety they were growing or what that was common seed. But again, so we can just kind of see what are people selecting and ask them kind of why are you selecting that? What are the challenges you're trying to address? Is it fusarium? Is it stripe rust? Is it powdery mildew? Those sorts of things. And that QR code for anyone's interested, just like you do here, we have performance trials, so you can check those out if you're interested. We can also look at things like tillage practices. This is probably one of the most common questions is, what % of producers are using no-till? So almost 70% of our producers in the program out of the 600 plus farms are using no-till, and so we've got an average yield there on those farms of 118, which is about 3.2 tons per acre in maritime terms. And then you can see there we've got minimum till, conventional tillage and conservation tillage are pretty close to each other, but not huge yield differences. And so we show this to growers because we want to highlight, obviously we want to promote no-till and to demonstrate to producers that no-till is not really generating this lag that we historically think we get with no-till.
Yeah, sure. So this is the average rate of nitrogen being applied per acre across all the 5 years. In the pilot year, we handpicked the farms, and so we probably picked some of the higher yield guys that are pushing a little bit more. That's why we see that 139 there. But right around that, between 120, and you can see over the last 4 years, we have been slowly ramping up the amount of nitrogen that's being applied. Nitrogen is an important component to crop yield. And as yields get higher, we have to build a crop canopy that has the root system and capability of taking up more nutrients because an 80 bushel yield or crop needs a lot less of these nutrients than a 150 bushel. And so as you ramp up yields, you need to expect that you've got to be able to grow a crop that can continually take up more of these nutrients. And so we're starting to see a little bit of that trend here in our nitrogen. And then our sulfur rates are running right around that mid-20s range as far as the amount of sulfur. Do you guys apply sulfur here? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, we found that wheat is very responsive to sulfur, and so we've got to be making those applications. So growers that are not doing that find out right away that, hey, I can boost my yield potential by getting some sulfur into the plan.
And this is just Ontario, so I broke out Ontario a little bit to be a little bit comparative, I guess. Slightly higher rates in what you'll see. We tend to have actually higher yields than other regions. Dennis and I are in a bit of a competition about who can get the highest yields. But so we have slightly higher rates, again, the mid-20s when it comes to sulfur. And what's an interesting trend we're seeing with some of the high-yielding growers in our yen is they're going upwards of 40, 50 pounds of sulfur in some cases. Again, those tend to be on much more responsive soils, sandy soils, history of manure. But this sulfur question comes up every year, and we're continuing to try to figure out, and we're seeing sulfur rates continue to increase.
Yeah, it seems like every year you can drive around the countryside and you can find fields that are this pale green that are sulfur deficient. But we find it every year. And so it's trying to get that word out so that people know to be making these sulfur applications because, if that crop is stressed, doesn't have the nutrients it needs, it's going to lag on, it's going to bring that yield potential down. And you want to make sure you're keeping that crop healthy, happy, all the way through grain fill period.
And so this chart is just showing, the other very common question we get asked is, what % of growers are splitting their nitrogen? What are doing single apps? Who's doing more than 2 applications? So the blue part of this graph here, this one here, is about 62% of our growers are actually splitting their nitrogen, which if you were to ask me before I saw this chart, I thought it would be the other way around with single apps, which is about 26%. So 2/3 of our growers are split applying their nitrogen. About 10% are doing a 3-way split, and I would say that the majority of those 3-way splits are hard red wheat growers in Ontario that are trying to put that extra application of sulfur nitrogen for protein. When it comes to soft red, they're typically just a 2-way split. And then we had some really hardcore growers that went out and tried some 4 and 5 applications, and here's how our yield landed on some of those. So our split application with 2 apps was 117 bushels, and our single application was 111 compared to our 3-way split, which was 122. And this 1% of growers that are doing the 4 apps, you also have to remember that's a very small proportion of growers, so that's going to skew things a little bit when comparing the yields that way. And all of these are the applications that we counted was anyone who put more than 10 pounds of nitrogen, because there's a lot of foliars going on, and so you could get upwards of 8, 9 applications. We wanted to only look at what significant amounts of nitrogen were being applied.
What's most common here? Are you doing single application nitrogen, or are you splitting it? Or is it a toss-up?
Who's splitting? Split?
Okay, all right.
So from single to 5, are those all in the spring?
These are all spring apps, so this doesn't include anything that goes down with your map or anything like that. This is just spring nitrogen. We might have taken it out, sorry. We did have a chart that showed differences between fall and spring, and our fall was typically no more than 20 pounds. And I would say a lot of it was probably like 10 to 15 pounds. Yeah, not crazy high amounts.
One of the things our millers are starting to tell us is that they're noticing the grain protein content of the crop overall is slowly starting to decline a bit. And so we as wheat producers have to make sure we're meeting the demand of what the market is, and we've got to make sure we maintain that protein. And I think splitting your nitrogen application helps keep that nitrogen out there long enough to get all the way through grain fill so that you're not limiting that. The other thing is, too, you got to remember there's an inverse relationship between protein and yield. So as yield goes up, generally protein goes down. So we got to make sure that as we ratchet yields up, and I think you guys have done a remarkable job over the last 7 years of bringing your yields up. You got to remember that you got to make sure that you're meeting the milling targets. What % of your wheat goes to milling here versus feed? Is most of it milling quality wheat?
Feed.
No?
Oh, it's all feed.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So do you have protein targets you need to meet for your feed market?
Not really.
Not really? The cows will eat it anyway? Doesn't matter? Or chickens? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we should also know, Michigan is about 90% soft white. Ontario is 90% soft red. And then we've got about 6 to 8% of hard red, and then we only have like 1 to 3% now of soft white. So it's slightly different markets, and all of our wheat stays in the Great Lakes Basin, and most of it is for milling.
And on average, I think our average protein content was 10.3. Overall, the entries in the end. So we're above the target where they want to be. And we're pushing yields upwards of 183 bushel yield, which is about almost 5 ton to the acre. So we're getting some really high yields, but we're still being able to maintain that. But they're splitting that nitrogen to get there.
We're not going to go into this in detail, but another thing we provide the growers is they like to ask like who's doing what, who's using a fungicide, who's using an insecticide, etc. Again, I mean, it's actually interesting to see how this all breaks out. Most growers are using a fungicide. Most of the insecticide use is in the U.S. It's quite cheap for growers to throw it in the tank. Most growers here are not using insecticides. And then foliars is kind of a mixed bag as well. We've got a range there, and again, the majority of producers are also using a herbicide. So not, really groundbreaking information, but growers, for whatever reason, they want to know who is doing what and when. Do you want to touch on this?
Yeah, and we do have some guys that are trying biologicals as well. You think about these guys that are on this high yield, high management kick. They're looking for anything they can try on their farm to kind of get to the next level. All right, I've got 5 more bushels. How do I get the next 5? All right, I got here. Now, how do I get the next? And as you ratchet up or stair step up your yield, it gets harder and harder to get that next 5 bushels. So they're looking at all of these things. But as far as like the biological products specifically, we're finding pretty similar results as Aaron, what you shared in the last slide, or Aaron and Tandra. So, yeah. But, that it's something on the market, and so these guys are trying it because they want to know. They want to test. They don't want to just take somebody else's word for it. They want to know on their farm what is going to provide benefit to them. So this chart shows the fungicide application by timing. The tallest bar is the blue one. That's the most common, and that is a combination of a T1 plus T3. T1 for us is that early in the season, right around when the first node is visible. The T3 is the flowering fungicide, and then T2 would be flag leaf timing approximately. The second tallest bar there is that green one on the right there, and that is growers that are only putting on one fungicide at flowering. And then there's a few that are doing other combinations there. But look at the one on the left there. That's kind of fun trying to get that pointer where you want it. But it's the yellow bar there. That people that are putting no fungicides on, and then above it, look at what those yields are. Okay, so we're finding that there's definitely benefit of putting fungicide on. Now, so notice this says 21 through 25. Okay, this is averaging across all 5 years. If we were to put up the 2025 slide, it's going to look a little bit different because of the disease pests that were present in 25. If you look at just 24, it'll look a little bit different depending on what diseases and when they come out, like stripe rust versus powdery mildew versus the late season, like leaf rust and whatnot. So
I like to joke that we finally broke the whole interprovincial trade thing, because we're pretty sure we gave you guys stripe rust this year, because we had it, I think it was mid-April, and we're trying to confirm if it actually overwintered in our part of the world. So we think we gave it to you guys in Quebec, so you're welcome.
We actually found some stripe rust in the fall on some wheat in Michigan. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see if it's there this spring, when the snow's gone and we can get out in the field and check. I'd be curious to see if it's there. But we actually had some early planted wheat that had some powdery mildew on it and some stripe rust in the fall.
And so this is just a quick summary of what our yields have looked like. So the blue bar is our average yield. The green bar is our average yield potential that we've modeled, that we estimate. And then the yellow bar is the percent of that potential that growers are achieving. So we've been pretty consistent across all years and all farms. We do have to add the caveat, we don't necessarily have the same farms year over year. From our first year, I think we have about a 10 farmers from the first year that have done all years. And then we've probably got about another 30 or 40 that started in year 2 and have stayed in all the way. So we are going to have some influxes on our yields, but that's what our average yields are. So around 3.1 to 3.2 tons per acre. But we think, based on some of the modeling that has a lot of asterisks on it, that some of these growers can grow as high as 5.5, 6 tons to the acre. And so, and we're seeing some farms get pretty close. One thing is, we do this yield potential model, and I know the Yen here is moving away from this, but the idea of it was to kind of see, under perfect management conditions, making some assumptions about the amount of sunlight the crop absorbs and how it translates that into biomass, the amount of water it uses, and then also some assumptions with harvest index. We try to estimate on these farms what we think they can produce, and then growers are trying to compare their actual yields to that. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of asterisks on this because we do have to make assumptions like things like rooting depth. And the truth of the matter is we have no idea. Our soil profiles, we don't dig soil pits like you do here. We've got 200 farms a year, and asking farmers to do it for us has been a big fat no. So we definitely overestimate some water availability. The other piece is that we don't actually account from anything in the fall. This model was adapted from the UK. They don't have the snow, the cold that we have, so we've had to make some assumptions. So we do this, but we really try not to get growers to focus on it too much. It's kind of like a pie in the sky goal in terms of like what they could try to work towards.
Yeah, when we have a bit of a dichotomy. We have some growers that'll look at their yield potential and say, there's no way I will ever get that yield on my farm. This is just totally unrealistic. But then I have other growers that are looking at that percent of yield potential and say, okay, here's my gap. You know, the reason for doing this is to identify what is the gap on your farm, and they are consistently trying to improve their percentage. They may never get to 100%. If I'm at 50% of my yield potential now, I want to try to shoot for 55% next year, and maybe pushing 60% next year. So some of them use it as kind of an internal benchmark to use on their own farm. So therefore, we're still doing it. We keep making adjustments to it, trying to refine it and improve it, because we know, at first rainfall that occurred 4 days before harvest counted equally as if it could have been applied, earlier in the season. Well, rainfall just prior to harvest doesn't help with yield any. So that gets discounted in the current model. And Josh Nazilski at University of Guelph is helping us with that. So
We're gonna have to keep moving a bit.
yeah, sorry.
So we talked about the report. We talked about some of the things we look at in terms of peer-to-peer. What are we as a collective seeing? And then what we've done is kind of gone to a bigger view and see, okay, what are the trends on all of these farms? And then what we also tried to do is break out, okay, what are the high-yielding producers in the program doing, and what are the low-yielding producers? So we break it out by a top 20 and a bottom 20. And so the most common elements amongst our growers in the end, number one, by far, by a landslide, is timely establishment, planting on time. Someone was talking about Agricor insurance numbers, or just crop insurance numbers. Sorry, we have Agricor in Ontario. Those, I wouldn't pay attention to those. You need to be focusing on the planting days that are optimum for your region and your farm. The number of head counts is highly tied to that. So early establishment, we get much more tillering in the fall. We want those fall tillers, not the spring tillers. And with that, we're getting high-yielding producers are getting over 800 heads per meter square. And they're also getting big crops, lots of biomass. So over 17,000 pounds an acre of biomass, which is 7.7 tons an acre of biomass. And then the fourth component that we're seeing, especially in the consistently high-yielding producers, they're always in the top 10, no matter what, and it is attention to detail. It's not, okay, it's April 19th, I better go put my nitrogen on. It's, I'm walking my field, I'm assessing my plants, how many tillers do I have, what growth stage am I at, what's the weather doing, and then they're making their applications. And that's really paying dividends for those growers. And so, again, as I mentioned, we do this top-bottom analysis. So this is 613 farms. So the top 20% is 123 farms, and the bottom 20% is 123 farms. And so our top 20% of producers across all years was 143 bushels. That's the average of those producers, which is almost 4 tons to the acre. Whereas our poor little sad guys here, they're at 88 bushels per acre, or 2.4 tons to the acre. And again, you can see the differences there. They're using, the lower yielding producers are planting over a week later. They're using higher seeding rates. They're 7,000 pounds of biomass less per acre. They're less than 600 heads per meter square, and they're spending more per bushel, which we're going to touch on more in a second here.
Those guys weren't sad. They were evaluating a soil pit.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So this is yields over time, and you can see we've held kind of consistent there, right in that 140s, kind of bottom 140s to upper 150, or toward upper 140s, and that 145 is about 3.95 tons, and then so that's what the high yield, the average of those top producers are. The average of the bottom producers is about that 2.5 9 tons. So it's a considerable difference in the yields between those top and bottom producers. And that trend is held consistent across all the years. We haven't seen that change over time. Do you want to talk about
Sure.
time?
So then, as we talked about, so the one of the factors is timely establishment. So we just broke out the Ontario numbers here for you guys today. Again, with the 2021 was all in Ontario, anyways. We kind of cherry picked our producers. These guys are already all high producing, high achieving producers. So the data is a bit flipped there, but with the exception of 2021, all of our lower yielding producers are seeding later than our high yielding producers. And you might think, okay, 3-4 days isn't much or 8 days isn't much. But our data shows that for every day that you delay planting, it's at least 1.1 bushels per acre. So if you're delaying planting 8 days, you're almost 9 bushels per acre that you're leaving on the table just by planting a little bit later. And if depending on the fall, that can actually grow quite a bit more. And we're going to touch in a second about, whether or not you can manage your way out of that planting date. And Dennis is going to touch a little bit about what that looks like in the field.
Yeah, so I'm not from this area, so I needed to try to get a feel for, okay, what does your fall look like? Because for winter wheat at least, which is higher yield, of course, like as mentioned before, than spring wheat. So with winter wheat, when do you need to plant in the fall? So I found a weather network and found the weather station here in Summerside, and I pulled the last 3 years of data, temperature data, and basically simulated, like, if we planted on September 13th, how many GDD accumulation would there be? And so I did that for each of those 3 years, and then I have a column on the far right for average, and basically from September 13th went basically in 10-day increments all the way down into planting in November. And so based on the phenology and growth, the way wheat grows and develops, in order to get, our target is 2 to 3 tillers we want to have in the fall before we go into dormancy going into the winter. Well, in order to do that, you've got to have about that 753 heat units. So when do you have to plant in order to achieve that? You got to plant early, September 13th. How many of you can plant that early? A few?
Oh, a few.
A few, okay. That's pretty important. So, and as you get later in the season, you see the heat unit accumulation is lower and lower. When you get to October 1st, and you look over there, that's 456 average growing degree units. You're only going to hit the 3 leaf stage at that point. So you germinated, you emerged, first true leaf came out, second true leaf, and the third true leaf is out. That's where it stopped in the fall. Okay, no tillers at that point. So that's kind of your target. You got to get planted before October 1st to really raise that bar on yield potential. So let's go on to the next. So this is this is a picture taken from a planting date and seeding rate study that I did back a few years ago. I did this over about a 3-year period, and I dug those plants on. Go ahead and advance. I dug those plants on December 11th, so we're headed into winter time. That's what this crop looked like. And then there's the 5 planting dates. So we started mid-September, October 1, October 15, November 1, November 15th. Which of these plants would you like to have on your farm going into the winter? Yeah. So, and look at the difference between October 1 and October 15. How many tillers are there on October 15? None, right? Okay, so October 1, we're getting some tillers. Now the actual date, that calendar date, is going to fluctuate each year based on soil temperature and your air temperatures and things like that. But now I'll show you what the yield is on each of those plants. So go ahead and hit the first one. That's the yield on that first plant, okay, planted September 15th. And then that's the yield of the second plant. Now let's go to the third planting date. What happened? We dropped off considerably, didn't we? Do you guys increase seeding rate when you plant later? Was that the trend? Okay. So notice on the bottom here, we go from 0.8 up to 2.4 million seeds per acre. How much has increasing seeding rate helped us so far? Not very much. Keep going. Let's go to the 4th planting date. Now we're starting to see a little bit of slope to that line. And then the 5th planting date, now we're actually seeing some differences. Because you look at the red line over here, that 2.4 million seeding rate did help us a bit on yield, but did it ever get us up to our original, the earlier planting dates? No. So increasing seeding rate will never get you back the lost yield potential from planting late. Go ahead.
So then the other question we get is, okay, so if I have a late seeding rate, I've, increased my seeding rates, what about managing my way out of the late planting date? Can I, put everything but the kitchen sink to the crop and get myself out of that late planting date? And so this is some work conducted by Emma Dillman, who worked with Dr. Dave Hooker, Dr. Nizelski, and I a couple years ago. And she did a couple locations, and she looked at an intensive management strategy, which was about 160 pounds of nitrogen split applied with 2 fungicides, a PGR, compared to a standard, which was about 110 pounds of nitrogen, sulfur on both, 1 fungicide, no PGR. And you can see there, so we got the September 17th planting date. We're at 100% of our yield potential. But you can see with that blue line, which is our intensive management strategy, as we delayed our planting, we could never get ourselves back up to that same yield potential as that earlier planting date. So can we manage our way out of a late planting date? And the answer is no. And that's why we talk so much about the importance and value of that early planting date. It is the most cost-effective and easiest way to increase your yield potential in your wheat crop. When we looked at the number of kernels per head as well as 1,000 kernel weight, this is not something that we can influence. This is highly variety by environment driven. You can see there, we're all over the place with that. So this wasn't something that we could manage with our planting date. But what we can manage with our planting date is our heads per meter square. And so again, this is our top and bottom, and you can see that our blue bars there are our high yielding producers, or our top 20% of producers. We're always well over 800 heads per meter square, whereas our lower yielding producers tended to be 600 to 700 heads per meter square. And we didn't have it in here, but when we break this out by all regions, those green bars actually drop down to closer to 500 heads per meter square. So again, this is something we control with planting date.
And so I saw earlier somebody use the unit plants or heads per square foot. Is that the unit you usually use?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, if it is, take this number and divide it by 10, basically. It's 10.7 is the conversion, but divide it by 10 will give you roughly per square foot.
It's a weird imperial metric combination. Same in Ontario. Oops, sorry. So then the other part about the planting date that we're seeing on these high-yielding farms is that they're able to increase and have really high biomass numbers. So again, the blue bars are high-yielding producers. Again, 2021 was a bit of an outlier year in our pilot year, but most years we're having over 17,000 pounds of biomass. And we look at just our top producers, it's always way over 17,000 pounds of biomass, where our lower yielding producers are in Ontario have been about 11 to 12,000 pounds. And I think, again, when we break it out by all regions, that drops down to about an average of about 10,000 pounds of biomass per acre. So again, biomass head counts, those are something we can control with planting date. We can't really control the number of kernels per spikelet or our 1,000 kernel weight on planting date alone.
So one of the things that we were also looking at is cost of production. One of the things that we hear a lot is, well, these guys that are pushing those really high yields, all they're doing is making passes across the field, and they're just throwing money at it, and they're not making any money. Well, we have some data that says that that's exactly wrong. Those guys that are doing that are making much more money. So if you take those, remember our top and bottom 20%, there's the top line is the average yield. Between the two, and then the amount of money spent on crop protection is higher by the top 20% compared to the bottom, as well as the crop nutrient spend per acre is higher. And so when you total them up, the total inputs on the high group was $321.47 compared to $283. So what is that, about $50 difference or so between them? So yeah, they're spending more money per acre, but when you divide it by their yield, that's $2.24 compared to $3.21. So who's making more money? Those high yield guys are making more money. where you run into trouble is if you start trying to throw money and do more inputs, but you're not getting the yield to go with it. That's when you get in trouble, okay? So, and that's the key point, this attention to detail. You've got to be able to figure out what is limiting yield on your farm. And because I have some growers that just want to, well, I think the way to get higher yield is to increase nitrogen. I had one grower put 250 pounds of nitrogen on this last year, thinking that was what's going to get him to the higher yield, and it didn't. That was not what was limiting the yield on his farm. So you gotta be able to find what those things are, and it's every farm's different, every field is different.
This is just the same as what Dennis touched on. It's just highlighting we broke out the Ontario ones just for interest's sake. So you could see, again, just reiterating, high yielding producers are spending less per average, even when you break out year by year. Oops, sorry, wrong way. You can touch on this one.
So, you know, when we think about, and this slide come from Roger Sylvester Bradley. He was gracious enough to come to our wrap-up meetings here 2 weeks ago in Ontario and Michigan. And, you know, one of the things, he talks about the farm factor. He did analysis trying to figure out what are the things that drive yield. And so there's things that, like the year, the climate, you know, those are key things that drive yield that we can't manage. The one that we can manage is what he calls the farm factor. That's about 40% of the variability in yield. So of that 40%, what are the things that those high yield guys are doing to get those high yields? And it's this attention to detail. And he said they have a 3-step process that they use to manage their crop, okay? So number one, you need to do a thorough review of annual benchmarking against other farms to see where you are on a field-by-field basis. Next, you need to plan what your actions are, what are you planning to do based on the data that you have on your farm. And then number 3, you execute and check, and then you come back and make adjustments. And so you follow that circle around, and then you just keep on following that circle around. And the option 3, or the item 3 there is very important. Check to see if your plan was on target. Do you see any nutrient deficiencies out there? You got to go out and walk the field in order to see that. So use information, make decisions, and develop a plan, but then as you're implementing that plan, you might need to make adjustments along the way. And it's the guys that have the ability and the time to do that are the ones that are able to keep on ratcheting up their yield time after time. So it's a management thing. I hear, we're running out of time, aren't we? I hear growers say, I don't have time to do all of that stuff. I'm like, if you don't have time to make improvements to your farm, how do you make decisions? Eventually, your management needs to have a role, and you need to spend some time dedicated to that to figure out how to continue to improve. Because if you don't, how do you expect to increase your yield? So we better skip over this because I think we're...
Okay, so we want to go into highlight what some of the high yielding producers, these are our 2025 winners. We talked a lot about attention to detail, and we want to just kind of highlight what we actually mean by that. So this was our high yielding producer this year, Nick Suin, and Nick has actually been in the top 3 for like multiple years in a row.
Notice where he's from. That doesn't say Ontario.
Yeah. Rub it in. And so Nick had a very impressive yield this past year of 182.7 bushels per acre, which is almost 5 tons to the acre, which we think is pretty amazing. And based on the weather data, all of the things we talked about in that model earlier, we thought his farm could produce just shy of 154 bushels per acre. So what this showed us is that we were underestimating the available water to his crop through the soil. So Nick produced over 20,000 pounds of biomass per acre. So again, we talked about that 17,000 benchmark. He had only 147 millimeters of rain. I shouldn't say that here today because you had way less rainfall, but 147 millimeters of rainfall this past year. One thing that Nick actually did in terms of his establishment is he actually changed his row spacing and got a new planter because of this program. So he was previously on 7.5-inch rows, saw the high yielding producers, what they were doing, and so he went to 5-inch row spacings as a result of what he had learned in this program. And so he now seeds at 5-inch row spacing. He does do some tillage after soybeans. There's a residue challenge there with some of the high yielding soybeans. He seeds quite early on September 21st. But what's really interesting with Nick too is he's only seeding at 1.24 million seeds per acre. I'm not sure if we have Jeff in the top three at all, but another grower in Michigan, he actually seeds at 750,000 seeds per acre, also on 5-inch row spacing. So some of these high-yielding producers are really pulling back on their seeding rates and still seeing these really high yields.
And that is one thing that we're seeing in the end is that we can produce high yields with less seeds per acre. In fact, our yield components improve when we do that. We back off that seeding rate. People think that, but you have to get planted on time.
Yes.
So if you're not planting on time, then you lose all that benefit.
For sure.
Yeah.
So he does have the access to manure. That's also something we're consistently seeing on our high-yielding farms. A lot of them have manure in the system. We're just really struggling to quantify the impact of manure, and anyone that works with manure understands what we're talking about. In terms of his fertility, though, again, not crazy, well, not for our part of the world, not crazy high nitrogen rates, 157 pounds of nitrogen. He's got 36 pounds of sulfur there, and he's split applying his with the bulk of it up front at tillering. He did use a fall herbicide, fungicide, insecticide program. And then he did do a T1, T2, T3 with some micros as well as a PGR. So he had a high yield potential crop, went out, saw what he had in the spring, what his tillering looked like, what his plant stand was, and he was able to put the groceries on and see the benefits or reap the benefits from those groceries. And he had a test weight of 59.8 bushels, and he had over 1,000 heads per meter square. I guess we should have did it the other way. Sorry.
Around. So I'll talk about Ontario now. It's a little bit lower yield than the Michigan one. But so still a really good yield at 170 bushels, which is 4.63 tons per acre. He achieved 93% of his yield potential. Again, another high biomass producer up there at 18,000 pounds. Do you know how much biomass you guys are producing here? Can you produce that many pounds of biomass in your wheat crop? Do you have any idea?
It would be about 17,000 is about 7.7 tons to the acre.
Yeah. I guess you'd take that number and divide it by 2204 would give you tons. But high biomass is very critical, and as you start to, if you're at a low yield, to get the next 5 or 10 bushels is not that hard. But once you get up to where you're up or toward the top, getting that next bit of yield is really, really hard. And so you have to produce a high biomass crop in order to get there, and this data shows it. His water, he had 363 millimeters of water available to his crop. He planted no-till after soybeans. September 21st is the planting date. So early, I shouldn't say early, he was on time planting his crop. 1.5 million seeds per acre. He's on a 7-inch row spacing. He did some in-furrow fertilizer with the seed. So does anybody try putting fertilizer in furrow with the seed here?
Is MAP commonly used here? Yeah, it is used, yeah. Okay.
So sometimes we see some benefit from putting MAP in the furrow. This was a special blend that he had for his farm, the 518-5 and then 1 sulfur. Variety was Pioneer 25R64. He did 3 applications of nitrogen. So he was one of the 3 split guys. Total application 157. Did you have something you want to say?
So this is not, for this particular grower, this 3-way app and the amount of sulfur is not typical. There was concerns with the product early on in the season, and they went back and top dress again. So this isn't actually a typical program. This grower typically does just a 2-pass and is typically about 20 to 30 pounds of sulfur.
Yeah, 25 pounds of sulfur is a good target to hit. Yeah, this is way too much. And then you can see what his crop protection program was. It's you got to manage the crop, and he's definitely doing a good job to get the yield and the tonnage out of it. But you got to have a good, thick, uniform biomass stand. Go ahead to the next one, in order to get those high yields.
Go for it.
So, and this is another grower in Michigan, Ben Wilson. He's a BASF rep, actually. He had 4.25 tons per acre was his yield. He got 82%. Another high biomass up there at 17,000 pounds per acre, which is about 8 tons. He had 288 millimeters of water. He uses conservation tillage, which means there's 30% of the residue left on the surface. After soybeans, he seeded it on time, September 27th, at 1.4 million seeds per acre. He's still on a 7.5-inch row, but he told me he's getting time to update the drill, and he's going to go to a 5-inch. That's his plan, because we found that narrower row, you can go to a lower population. What that spaces those plants out and allows them to tiller more, and it changes your yield components. And that's how we're getting those higher yields. His in-season fertility, he did 2 passes of fertilizer, total 136 pounds of nitrogen, and it looks like, I don't know how many pounds of
22.
sulfur, and then some magnesium as well. And then his crop protection plan, he got herbicide, T2 and T3 fungicide. He did plant growth regulator, and he had a higher head count to it at 813 heads per meter squared. So that's one of the keys, is getting those higher head counts.
And then we also do an award for highest percent of yield potential achieved. So we have 3 highest yield and then 3 of the highest percent of potential achieved. So of course, Nick also won this one. Again, he achieved 118% of his potential. It's very similar to what the previous slide showed. You know, he's got a corn, soy rotation. He's on a sandy loam. He does have some manure on this farm, which again, he thinks is definitely contributing to his success. And then we've got Mark Davis. Mark is our broadcast seeded guy. He has somehow mastered this. Broadcast seeding is not something we recommend in Ontario, but where it does come into play is where you wouldn't plant wheat otherwise. So if you weren't able to get your soybeans off in good time, your soil is maybe a bit heavier, you're worried about running up the field, we find that some of those growers are looking to broadcast seeding. They're going in at leaf drop, throwing in their wheat seed to try to get it planted, just to get wheat planted. The challenge with that is if you use treated wheat seed and you put it in your standing soybean crop, there is a risk of that wheat seed contaminating your soybean crop, and you could be rejected. So that is something you have to be very, very, very careful with. A lot of the growers in Michigan are doing a broadcast and then doing some tillage. They're not doing it into standing soybeans. So if you're going to do what Mark does, you have to be very careful. But again, Mark achieved almost 105% of his potential. Again, over 17,000 pounds of biomass. He's seeding super early because he's broadcast seeding. Our recommendation is start at 2 million seeds per acre if you're broadcasting. But again, he did a 1 pass this year for nitrogen and sulfur. It was very dry in his part of the world. He did a 2-pass program with some fungicides, micros, and he is our guy that's trying a lot of biologicals. And again, very high on the heads per meter square.
Yeah, so are there any other slides we want?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
We had the red light blinking at
Yeah,
us, and
so
I'm not
we
sure
gotta
if we're
hurry
going to
up,
get
so-
sprayed with water. I don't know what's going to happen.
So then
here yet.
again, Gary Vader from Ontario, similar, 17,000 pounds of biomass, over 800 heads per meter square, and you can see what he did there. And again, I guess at the end of the day, our key takeaways are really, again, timely establishment really is everything. Plant within your window in order to start at your highest yield potential and then work your way from there. And you can manage your biomass, your head counts, and then in the spring, that really close attention to detail will pay dividends. You don't have to put more on. It's about when you put your groceries on. Quickly touch on this for 2 seconds.
Okay, 2 seconds. We have networking opportunities. We actually took a group of growers to the UK last year. We usually rotate around next year. In this summer, we're going to Kentucky and visit farms there. At agribusiness, we have other networking opportunities with, we have this WhatsApp group where it's only open to our Yen participants, and they share ideas and they take pictures and, well, what growth stage am I at, and what disease do I have, and how should I handle this? One of the discussions last year was, I've got urea bridging up in the fertilizer spreader. What's other people done to figure out how to eliminate that? And so everybody chimed in with what they've done. So it's a great opportunity there.
All day, every day, they're talking.
Yeah, some days it's like you got to shut it off. It's like ding, 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 ding all day. But and then we got other resources. One of the things that we do have is dashboards. So we have our data in a Power BI system. So you can go in there and take, I don't know, was there 6 or 8 of those dashboards now? And you can filter by year. You can filter by location. soil type and things like that to see how some of these things affects the data as well. So that's available to our growers on a kind of an internal website that they can go to. And then, we've got lots of sponsors, so we thank them.
And the growers,
That was
as
very
Steve
fast.
mentioned, the growers really are the backbone of this program, and without them, this would never happen. Like, these growers, unlike here in the Maritimes, they are doing their own sample collection. We did that the first year and quickly learned we can't do that with 200 farms, and so truly a huge thank you to the growers. Any questions? Sorry, I know we're over time.
What's the crop rotation?
The crop rotation varies.
Yeah, it
Go
depends on where you are. Primarily, our previous crop is soybean, and a lot of times the crop rotation is corn, soybean, wheat. But there's places where we have dry beans in the rotation, sugar beets, canola, barley, peas.
We're seeing
So-
more growers shift some soybean acres to edible bean acres to get the soybeans off earlier, or to get the edible beans off earlier and planted earlier. The other piece to it is we find that we have less residue issues with our edible beans compared to our soybeans. So growers are finding that rotation works a little bit better. And then in Kentucky, those growers are primarily after grain corn. So they're doing a lot of tillage.
There's no legume in your rotation.
On the livestock farms, there can be some 4-year alfalfa in the rotation. We have a combination of livestock.
There would be
and no
soybean or
livestock.
dry bean. Usually, one of those two crops as a legume crop in the rotation. We rarely don't have a legume in there. It'll vary depending on where you are. Any other questions?
What's the earliest you would put winter wheat in?
Yeah.
September 1st, like pushing it way too far?
Yeah, so you can plant wheat too early. And what happens is it'll tiller out significantly in the fall, and it'll get, because if you're going to do that, you really got to back your population off. Because if you don't, you're going to have really spindly stems, really spindly tillers. It's a haven for aphids in the fall. You can get powdery mildew. We had stripe rust in there in the fall. And then you try to manage that crop in the spring. You've got to be really careful how you put your nitrogen on, because you will just cause lodging as a really big problem. So yes, you can plant too early. The target would be you probably want to be in that 750 to 800 GDDs in the fall,
Yeah.
somewhere in that area.
Yeah, somewhere in that. And if you're gonna plant super early, you definitely use a insecticide seed treatment, because barley yellow dwarf virus, especially, there's a lot of cover crop use here, right? So if you've got a lot of cover crops or oats, or lots of oats in the rotation, as Dennis mentioned, the oats will stay in the oat cover crop, and then they'll go to your wheat as soon as it emerges. In Northern Ontario, for perspective, our recommended seeding rate or date for them is August 25th to 30th. Once you get into Southern Ontario, it's anywhere from September 15th to September 30th. So we actually have a planting date map, and it's all based on your geography and where you are. So it would be tough for us to say what your optimum planting day is, but looking at the GDDs, like this part of the world, you should be planting by September 15th.
Labor Day is kind of a good, like,
Yeah, so
week after Labor Day. But don't you guys have a Hessian fly date?
yeah, so that's what Michigan uses, a Hessian fly free date. I don't even think we have ever seen it. Like, that's not really an issue. But that's in the Ontario planting date map. The aphid pressure and the Hessian fly free date is taken into that account.
Yeah, that's 40-year-old research. So in general, that fly-free date is a good agronomic date to look at, but we don't have Hessian fly as a problem. You got to go south in the southern United States to see Hessian fly as a problem. It's not a problem anymore here for us. Any other questions?
Sorry for taking your time at the very end of the day when you all want to go home, but thank you.